Welcome everyone to our session. Thank you for joining us. I'm Wesley Holden, a project advisor here at Totara Learning, and today we are focusing on the feature competencies within Totara Learn. So a fairly straightforward question that many of us probably already have an answer to, so I'm going to actually leave it up to the group to answer this one. What are competencies? Yep, Wendy says evidence of ability to consistently perform a task to a particular level. Yes, that's great. Thank you for that, Wendy. Yeah. So some of us may be coming in the door, not actually knowing what competencies are. That might have been actually what brought you to the webinar. It's like, oh, we're talking about learning and we're talking about content, but what's a competency? Well, as Wendy said, it's an ability and being able to track that ability. Specifically, it can be defined as skills, knowledge, or behaviors that we want our learners to walk away with. A skill could be something like the ability to, they know how to use the brakes on the forklift that they're learning how to drive. Knowledge would be so, and with that skill, it could be literally somebody testing them to make sure they know how to do that thing in a physical setting. Knowledge could be they're aware of a process, they're aware of what to do in case a certain thing happens, what form to grab if they need to, requisition some new supplies. Or behaviors. Behaviors meaning maybe we're looking for change. Maybe this is somebody that has been having issues or having reports to HR around like sexual harassment, or maybe they're a new employee and we want to sort of set the tone for behaviors that are appropriate within our organization. Those are the sorts of things that we want to track using competencies. So skills, knowledge, and behaviors are kind of the general groupings of those things. And as Wendy said, what that points to is that we need to be able to track that people are able to perform these things, that they're performing them consistently at a particular level, and that we're tracking the evidence of that. So there's a lot of pieces, and thank you, Wendy, because there's a lot of really great information kind of encoded in that one sentence. We're going to track those competencies or skills within Totara Learn, and I'm going to jump into showing you how we're actually going to do that. But the second piece is, well, okay, that's great. How does this have to do with learning management? Well, a learning management system gives us the ability to train people and track people, essentially. So if we have, if this checkbox on the left is representative of our competency, the skill, the knowledge, or the behavior that the person needs to have, we need to give them coursework that trains them in how to do it. We need to know what sort of competencies are appropriate for that person, potentially based on the position or job that they have, potentially based on the organization they work in. The competency list or the skills that you need to have may be very different if you're an accountant versus if you are the forklift driver. Or if you're in IT, you may have a very different idea of what security looks like than what security would look like for someone in a different position in the company. And learning plans are going to be a way to track competencies, to mark them, to assign them to users, and we'll look at that within the system as well. But I wanted to give you just that idea that competencies aren't sort of just this free-floating thing out in the universe. We need to be able to track them. And I know I've come from some organizations. Like my very first job was actually working for essentially like a parking lot or a company that managed parking lots. And this is before you had the machine where you could drive up and like stick your credit card in and just automatically pay. There was a person sitting in a booth. So some of the skills I needed to have, I needed to be able to be there at work. That was a big piece. So the behavior was show up for work and be on time because I needed to physically be in that booth. One of my skills was being able to figure out how much the person needed to pay. So it was literally like we would, kind of stick the little card, the ticket into a time stamping machine, and then we would figure out the difference between the two times and charge them based on that. So those were some skills I needed to have. I also needed the skill of being able to count change and things like that. And then in terms of knowledge, I needed the ability to know, well, what happens if something like out of the usual happens? What if this person parked all night and is now leaving? What do I need to do with them? If a car does get left all night, what do we do about that? Like, how do we make note of that? So what's the process that I need to know around that? So those are just some examples. What are some examples? I'm going to ask from you guys. Give me some examples of competencies, either skills, knowledge, or behaviors that you need to train your users on, things that you may be using Totara Learn for already or that you're getting ready to and you're trying to kind of figure out how to do it. And I'll just leave it open if you want to throw some ideas in the chat, just some things that, skills, knowledge, or behaviors that you need to train your users on that you might be able to track using a competency. So let's get down to it. Let's take a look. That's very high level conceptual. Now we're going to look at what we actually do with that in the system. How does it work? So I'm going to pop out of my PowerPoint and we are going to go ahead into our demo site. If you want to follow along, you're welcome to. You can join us at demo.totaralearning.com. This is a site that is always freely available. You can go, and it's always on the latest version of Totara Learn. So right now it's on Totara Learn version 12. And you have the ability to go in as an administrator, kind of poke around, see what you can do, look at things as a manager, as a course creator creating content, or as a learner and how things are going to work. Yeah, and so Wendy is a great example. Everything. We operate laboratories, so all tasks need to have associated competencies in line with regulatory requirements. Yeah, and that is, thank you, Wendy, for that. And that is something that we do see very often. Being able to track those pieces, like I know that a lot of folks, a lot of Twitter subscribers are dealing with things like OSHA, dealing with GDPR, dealing with all of those different standards, all of the different government regulations from various governments. Like in the U.S., we have like the FDA or DOT or other organizations that all have different standards, and so we need to be able to meet those and make sure that our folks are meeting them, and make sure that we can report on that, because it's great if I'm able to show up to my parking lot and do my job, but when it comes to my manager or my manager's manager, how do they know that I'm doing the job? And if something happens, like if I show up with an empty, at the end of the night, we would have a bag of money. And at the end of the night, part of my job was to go through and do up a receipt and, count the tickets and all that kind of stuff and make sure that the amount of money I had made sense for the amount of tickets I had and the amount of cars that I had. And so there's competency tracking there. And if for some reason somebody was not meeting that, like for example, someone kept coming in short for some reason, didn't have enough change in their bag or something like that, we would hope that they would start by looking at retraining and going, okay, let's see, like, what is this person doing wrong? Are they doing their math wrong? Are they calculating the money wrong? What's going on here? Because we're going to assume that potentially it's a training issue. So first, we're going to take a look from a learner's perspective of what a competency looks like and how they would interact with it in the system. And then we'll take a look from the administrator side of how we actually go and set these up. So I'm a learner and I'm coming into the system. This is a system that's already been set up ahead of time. The user was created. There was a position that was created for them. So we know in case of Lisa Lerner, if I go to her user profile, I can see that she is a service advisor. And if I click in there, I can see that she's an advisor for the service desk specifically. So that's sort of like a help desk IT position. And she works for Michael. So those are details that every Totara system can hold about your users. Those are things that we already know. One of the things we know is what a service advisor needs to do. We know what coursework they need to take. We know what competencies we need to track about them. And we can keep track of that all in what's called a learning plan. So with Lisa, if we go under My Learning and look at her learning plans, we can see that she has a course assigned, 11 competencies, and 1 objective. So let's go ahead and we're going to jump into learning plans and to that competencies tab. So here are the competencies that have been assigned to Lisa. In her case, she has more of an IT job, and so she needs to do things like running system backups. She needs to manage courses and file structures. She needs to set up learning plans. So a lot of this is kind of Totara focused because that's what she's supporting. But she also has competencies around like health and safety training and managing the incident register for accidents. So competencies can be a really wide, and with that laboratory example, that's great because you have everything from basic health and safety up to processes and procedures for managing things appropriately, how to handle chemicals, how to clean up spills, up into the management level where we're dealing with the same thing managers at like an accounting firm would need to deal with, how to deal with interpersonal connection, how to deal with problems when it comes to like HR, how to help people manage their goals, etc. So the competencies listed here are a combination of 2 things. One, it is competencies that have been assigned to her automatically. Some of these, like administering the system backups, completing incident registers, etc., these were assigned to her based on the position that she holds in the company. Some others are just honestly based on the fact that she exists within a certain organization. Maybe she's the IT person, but she happens to be working at one of the labs. And so she needs to be able to complete the same health and safety training that anyone else working for the lab needs to complete. Whether I'm a chemist or I'm the janitor, I need to know how to handle different chemicals and things like that. So we can see a list of competency names, and these are going to be custom to your system. So you get to come in and set up your own competency lists and decide what they're going to be. You're going to set the proficiency. So what status is the person at? Are they competent? Are they not competent? And you'll see where you'll be able to actually expand this list. This isn't the be-all and end-all of the types of statuses you can have. There are different levels of proficiency as well. Can you do this with a supervisor present? Are you able to do it by yourself? That kind of thing. We can see if there were any courses required that the person completed that are part of completing that competency. So if I have to go and take a course on CPR, that's a really common one. Do you need to go and take your first aid CPR course? And that can actually be linked to the completion of that competency. You complete the course, the competency is marked complete as well. We can also have additional evidence. So if I completed something outside of Totara, which is very common, maybe I had a Red Cross certification when I got hired, and so I don't need to take an additional training class. I can actually link that evidence into the existing system. We can also have competency priorities. So we can say, how important is this, or sort of in what order do you need to complete these? What is our due date? And please keep in mind with priority and due date, these fields are here as information to the user. Nothing is driven by them, so it's not going to force them to complete them in a certain priority. It's not going to, yell at them about due dates or anything like that. It's just informational for the user. And then you can have comments. You can have discussion back and forth of like, hey, I'm not sure how I complete this. And then my manager can message back and be like, oh, here's this course I can assign you that you could take, or you could do something else. So this is where my user sees their competencies is within their learning plans. Another place they'll see it is within reporting. So if I go up to, I'm going to go back to my dash. If I go to my record of learning, I'm also going to see the competencies I've been assigned. And the nice thing about coming to the record of learning to see these is that it's not going to just be for that one learning plan. I may have multiple learning plans in the system. I may have competencies that are assigned in a different way, like assigned to my position or organization, that I haven't linked through a learning plan necessarily. So this will show you all of them, all of the competencies this person has ever been assigned and their status. That's from the learner perspective. If I need to, I want to do things like, let's say that there was a hazard. I had 30 people in the lab. Nobody reported it. What are we going to do? The first thing I can do is come back and look at my training and go, okay, I can see there's 30 people in the lab looking at a report, and I can see if they completed that training or not. And if I suddenly realize like, oh, none of those 30 people have completed that training, that drives me to know, okay, we need to assign some training in the system, or we need to have a workshop and have people come in for a day and learn how to do this thing. So competencies are about that back-end reporting piece, but it's also about being able to drive learning and say, oh, okay, like I know I need to hold a course on this. I need to hold a seminar on something, that kind of thing. So let me pop out as Lisa, and I'm going to now log in as an administrator. So let's say that we've discovered some serious safety hazards and we're needing to go and add a new area of training. Or maybe our company has expanded and suddenly, in this case, we now have a lab that is part of our organization. Maybe we used to send that work out to someone else to do and just report the data back to us, but now we've actually added that to our organization. We need to now go and add those competencies. So I'm going to start by going to Site Administrator. Now keep in mind that I'm on a Totara 12 site. The things I'm doing and talking about right now apply to previous versions as well. The one difference, honestly, is just where I go to administer this. So in 12, I'm going to this administration cog up here. Otherwise, if you're in previous versions, you'll see most likely on the left-hand side a site administration block that you can then dig into. And you'll go under hierarchies and then competencies. But in my case, I'm going to go core platform competencies. So we start with some competency frameworks. A framework is just sort of like a holding area for my competencies. I may have thousands of competencies across my organization. This is a way to break them up into logical groupings. So in this case, I have ones that are linked to my courses. I have some that are specifically around language, so I'm going to jump into this. We expect language skills from our learners, and if they are able to, what we want to track is different levels of qualification. So we have different levels for them. In this case, if they're level 5, their competency level is being able to manage all of these different pieces. Okay, so a competency can have sub-competencies like children. We're going to keep ours simple this. We're going to add our new framework. Our new framework is all about health and safety. We can give it an ID number if we want to. We don't have to, though. And an important piece here is that we're going to choose our scale. A scale is a way to decide the proficiency level that a person has. Now, by default, the system comes with a competency scale that's very logically called competency scale, but you can create additional ones. So the one that's in there by default, if I click in there, has 3 levels. You are competent with supervision, or you are not competent at a task. But in the real world, you may have more levels than that. So if I add a new competency scale, maybe we'll say proficiency levels. And then we enter our scale values. So they could be a level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. They could be professional. Oops. They may be, amateur at something, which doesn't sound particularly nice. Like there's probably better ways I can word that. But you can go through and decide what those levels look like. I'm going to go with something that I'm seeing a little bit more. We're going to have like a platinum level. It's like gold, silver, bronze. And then if I want to, I can have a scale value that is basically like not selected or something like that. Or I can just leave that as not assessed. So I'll save my change. Here are my proficiency levels. And let's say that, maybe platinum isn't the only proficiency level. Maybe once you hit gold status, you are proficient, you are considered proficient at doing this thing. We can actually go and update this proficient value. This is sort of like your past value, like yes or no. So we can say that if you're gold, you are also considered proficient at that task. I can save changes there. If I'm not proficient, we'll see that down here. And so that means that the competency is not considered complete because I'm not proficient. Once you hit proficient, then you're good. We also start with a default value. In this case, everybody's starting at bronze. I've also seen things like not yet rated is a common one, or basically that the competency is assigned but not evaluated yet. Because there are some cases where maybe I have people coming in from a medical field, and it's not that they're not proficient at something, they just literally haven't been rated for it yet. So I might say not yet assessed as my favorite. So there's my not yet assessed. So they're not proficient, but that doesn't mean that they can't do the thing. It just means they haven't been checked to see if they can do the thing. We can build our scale. And then we can build our framework. And actually, I'm going to get rid of this health and safety, and I'm going to create a different one with a different scale. So I'm just going to delete that. If you decide that, as you're building them, you don't like the way you did something, you can delete these, you can add them. Even if competencies have been rated, they can be deleted from the system. Just be very careful with that because you don't want to lose that information about your users if you have put them into use already. So, and actually, let's just call this safety. Then we'll use our new scale. And so we can see that we've assigned this but not actually used it. So if I realize that I typoed something in my proficiency levels, I can go and actually change it before I put it into use. Now I'm going to go and actually add items to it. So I can add a new competency. And I'm showing you the manual way to sort of do it all by hand, but there are ways to import competencies so you don't have to do it all by hand. So my first piece might be hazardous spill cleanup. We can have ID numbers. We may have ID numbers associated with something outside of the system, like especially like with OSHA or something like that, or the FDA. If you have specific ID numbers associated with some of these, put them in there. When you're doing your reporting, you'll be able to run the report and say, okay, with competency, you know, whatever the ID is, here is our list of people and their statuses. We can describe it. So if you want to include more information, you can do that. We have types. So competency types, and I'm not going to get much into this today just because it's a bigger concept. Competency types are a way to group our competencies. So if you have competencies not just in one framework, but across frameworks, and you want to have them typed, you can do that. So it's just and you can also include additional fields. So for example, if I choose one of these, I might be able to have an additional like checkbox that you mark. Is this related to medical positions or something like that? So it's a way to track more information about the competency than just these 3 or 4 fields. Then we have our aggregation method. And what that means is this a parent or not? If the person fulfills this competency, if the person fulfills child competencies related to this, does it fulfill this overall high-level competency? Like with a hazardous spill cleanup, there's way more to it than just, go and grab a tissue and like wipe it up. We need to assess what we've spilled. We need to, get any appropriate safety gear. We need to get whatever we need to actually do the cleanup. So there's a lot more pieces to it potentially. And so what I can do is create a parent like this, and then I can create child competencies. So if I add another competency, the parent could be the hazardous spill cleanup, and this could be, assessment of material. If you walk into a lab and there is something on the floor and you're not sure what it is, you're going to put the brakes on what you're doing to figure that out. Did somebody pass out on the floor? Do you need to figure out what it is? What got spilled? That kind of thing. So with the aggregation method, you can say all or any or off. All means all of the children need fulfilled. Any means any of the children can be fulfilled. So maybe if it's a language assessment, I can say, if you can do this in English, Spanish, or French, that's good enough. And I'm going to save changes. Now there's 2 pieces here. We can assign related competencies. So a related competency would be something that just maybe topically tied to this one, but it's not related in the sense of if I fulfill that one, it's going to fulfill this one. This relationship is just, these things are kind of associated with each other. We can also link coursework. So we can say, this is where I can come in and say, okay, you need to assess the material for the cleanup, and here is the course that teaches you how to assess the material. So we can come in and choose from the list of courses on the system and say, okay, this course will give you the information you need about that thing. You can make this link optional or mandatory, meaning when it's added to a learning plan, is it removable, this course, or does it have to stay permanently? Here are the couple of competencies I've created. And I've seen frameworks that can include hundreds, like if with the Lominger competencies, this is about like management and things like that. So, are people action-oriented? Do they care about their direct reports? And there's just hundreds of individual competencies here. And I say hundreds, but I think there's like 67 or something like that. So you decide how you're going to break them up across frameworks. Do something logical. It could be by the type of work. It could be based on who the reporting is going to, like if it's to OSHA or something, do it and group all those together. So you decide what frameworks make sense. You decide what competency scales make sense. Each of these frameworks can have their own competency scale. So all of the competencies within this framework would be rated using the same scale. And then I can take those competencies, I'm going to show you very quickly just how you can link those to positions and organizations. So we showed you how to link it to a course. We can also say, okay, we know anybody who has this position needs to know this thing. So if I go into a position framework and say, if you are a supervisor, you need to have this competency, and we can go and choose to add the competency. We get into and this is where having those frameworks is really helpful, because otherwise I just have a list of hundreds. I can go and say, okay, with my safety competencies, my hazardous spill cleanup, I want you to be able to do these. and I'll link them across. And this link top, we're just kind of ignoring it for today because it has to do with when this competency shows up in a learning plan. Can someone potentially remove this competency as a requirement for the person, or does it stay as a mandatory item for them? And so you're able to go through, and I can reuse that as much as I want. I might go through every single position and add it to it. Or instead of doing that, I might say, well, everybody who works in the lab needs to know that. So we'll go into our organization framework and say, well, that the people in that one position need to have it, but also anybody from IT needs to have it because they may end up going in and having to deal with that thing too. So we can come in, we can do that link if we want to. So we'll go in for, like, if we go, let's say, service and support. Sorry, it's taking a second. And we can go in and assign a competency if we want to. If I go in and hit the edit for that. So you get to decide. And I think with that particular user, they actually worked for the service desk, so we could come and link the competency here, and then we'll be able to see that for her. Now, the final piece of competencies that's pretty slick is when I want to have it show up for a user, what I can do is add it to their learning plan or create a learning plan for them. And competencies can automatically appear in a learning plan, but because the system can look at the person's position or organization, say, oh, you work for the service desk. We just assigned you that competency. Here it is on your learning plan. And we can do the same thing for positions. The competency tracking, again, you can do it through the record of learning. There are also report sources that allow you to track competency status, so I can come in and run a report. If there's an incident, I can come in and say, okay, I need to see everybody who works in a certain area, and let's see that particular competency. And in this case, my new one's not showing up because it just hasn't been assigned to anybody yet. Or I should say anybody that's showing up on this report. But then we can see those different competencies, the proficiency status. We can add additional information to, like the date they were considered proficient. I'm going to go ahead and stop there. There's honestly just a ton more I could say about competencies, but I'm going to go ahead and pop in and give you some resources. First, please come to us at the Totara.community site. There is a great course on competencies that gets even deeper into the areas that I sort of touched on. So there's competencies, there's version 12, there's also a version 11 course if you need something for previous versions. And it will work you through the concepts that we worked through today. It will take you through some simulations so you can get some practice on adding new competencies and changing the settings. And you also are awarded with a badge when you complete that course. And then you can also see where the demo site is, that sort of thing. We've also got some upcoming webinars. So if you, again, come to the Totara community site, our upcoming webinars are listed. We have a seminar session coming up on June 26th, talking about more face-to-face or synchronous events that we need to track. We've got a session coming up with our lead graphic designer, Matt Stokes. He's going to be talking about effective animation for learning. So he's the one, he and we both design all of the animations that we use within the Totara Academy. So please come join us if you're interested to see his process for that. It's super fascinating. From someone who doesn't come from a design perspective, I really enjoy seeing his work and how he creates those pieces. Also on June 26th, we have the Learner Social Contract. So we have Lori Niles-Hoffman, who's coming to join us to talk about what it looks like as a learner. What is our moral responsibility to workers? And setting up training. And finally, on July 3rd, we have our Best Healthcare Project. So the European League Against Rheumatism was awarded Best Healthcare Project for 2018 with Totara. And so we have folks from both the subscriber, EULAR, as well as LearnChamp, their partner company, coming to talk about that project and how it went for them. So if you have any other questions, please hang on the line. Otherwise, feel free to jump off. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day and join us for another upcoming session.